Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, fired? Are you sure? Okay. Vigilante justice on serial rapist 1959. Threaten my brother's life, lose literally everything. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1, this story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2, this happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. Note 3, I am not a native English speaker, and professional terms may be wrong. I'm happy to take any corrections. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no bullshit kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this, and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective coworkers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. In it everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the 3 managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business, signed by his former manager, and the IT policy available, and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare, and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business, now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice. Since the projects he had managed could not go on without him, he was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake, and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages: 3 months pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension, and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations, and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin and "What are you going to do? Fire me?" after that. Vigilante Justice on Serial Rapist 1959. Alright, I seriously debated posting this, but I have decided to share it. So when I got out of the Navy in 1958, like many young men, I joined a fraternity. Now most of the brothers were nice people except this asshole we'll call Brad. Brad was a 4-time legacy from our fraternity. At first, he seemed nice, but after he became a fully initiated member he let his inner ass show. He was such an ass because he would always show off with daddy's money. He was 18 and never had a job. He always got super drunk at the parties and got handsy with other people's girlfriends. Now his dad was a political figure in Sacramento, and his mother's father worked in the California system of higher education. Brad knew that he was untouchable and wasn't afraid to let you know. Brad in 1959 crashed 3 cars because he drove drunk. His parents bought a new Cadillac each time because he claimed someone stole and crashed his. When his parent bought him a Buick convertible, he said that he has a reputation to uphold and doesn't want people to think that he is poor. A couple of months into the fall semester and Brad is drunkenly harassing women at the party, even saying lewd and suggestive things to them. We try to cut him off, but he keeps going on. Some of us go and leave Brad to himself. Hours later we see a girl leaving Brad's room. I'm thinking in my head she doesn't want to be seen taking the walk of shame. She just cries while covering her face and holding her shoes. I knock on Brad's door and he says, "Ready for round 2? Get your ass on the bed." When he sees that it is me, he put his clothes on. I ask why that girl was crying and he said, "How the fuck should I know? But she was blonde, tan, tight." I ignore him, but I tell the other brother what happened. They know that he is a pig and just brushed it off. A couple of days later, police came to our house and arrested Brad for rape. Apparently, they were watching him because 13 other girls were accusing him. Now Brad had this birthmark on his private parts. So the statements from the girls were taken into account and he was arrested. The evidence was undeniable, especially with the details that the girls were giving regarding Brad. Due to him being a sexual predator, he was expelled from the chapter, without him knowing important later, so we in one of the sororities on campus started a support group for the victims. Girl 1 was saying how Brad made her feel, and that she wanted to get back at him. Girl 2 was talking about if she had the chance she would kick his ass. So one of our brothers, who we'll call Ralph, said, "Ralph, well, why don't you?" Girls, what? "Ralph, when he comes back to the house we can take him somewhere and you can have some time with him. In the desert, alone." So mere days after Brad was arrested, he was bailed out the help from mommy and daddy, and he came back to the house. We started lying, saying how we know that the charges were BS. He said, "Brad, yeah, my dad has a whole team of lawyers representing me, this is going to go away fast." Brad gets drunk but Ralph roofied him. Ralph and some of the other guys proceed to drive 3 hours east from the coast into the California desert. Ralph and some of the other guys meet the 9 of the 13 girls in the desert. They wake up Brad, who is still somewhat drunk, and push him out of the car. Now as Brad wakes up, I was told that he went pale face as he saw the women that he victimized were standing over him with blunt objects, stabbing weapons, and a shovel. Brad cries out to Ralph and the other guys. Brad, sniffling, "You can't leave me here alone." Ralph said, "Ralph, you aren't alone, you have plenty of company, and you know everybody there." The guys drove off and the girls came back to campus 3 hours later, with dirt on their clothes and a red-stained potato sack. Us guys never knew what became of Brad. But to this day, when we see the remaining girls that are living, we never ask. Thanks for reading. Threaten my brother's life, lose literally everything. Background: I have, and always will be, intensely protective over my family. If I can prevent them from seeing harm, I will at practically all costs. Especially my brother, who happens to have OCD, and has been the kindest brother I could have possibly asked for. Even though I just started my junior year of high school, I had been practicing card cheating since 5th grade. It was to the level even if you thought I was cheating, the sleights were so hard to see you couldn't see them while looking for them, even though my shuffling, intentionally, looked quite sloppy. The friends I had at the table, the 3 of them, for this incident knew I had this skill, and played with me anyway. They're probably playing with me now as you read this, knowing my life. I grew up in a neighborhood that basically believed that any disability warranted your death, and that any kid with a mental disorder doesn't deserve to exist. So, naturally, my brother was targeted quite often with hate and threats about his OCD. The beginning. Note, all of this happened in one day. I found everything out that morning, began planning, and it fell into place that night, to my surprise and thanks to one of my 3 friends that sat at the table with me. I'd found out that someone was threatening to murder my brother for having OCD. When I found out this person was gonna play cards with us that afternoon, everything fell into place. He didn't know he was about to play cards with the most protective brother he'll ever see, and probably his last. Revenge. Later that night, 2 of the friends, who weren't yet in on it, noticed something odd. I nearly immediately sat in the dealer's seat, which usually meant I was about to be sneaky, which I was. I said, "Playing for cash, are we?" To which the man, we'll call X, said he'd love to. I knew he would fall for it, since I also knew he was quite well off due to some digging I did before the night began. Then, we began to play. My friends began to notice that neither of them were losing, and that the man opposite the table was losing. My plan was showing itself. I was cheating the guy hard. He wouldn't stop, either, because I did the easiest trick in the book, making him have a really strong hand to think he had a shot when in reality I forced a far better hand on one of my friends. In total, he lost around 300k, 100k to each of my friends individually. Turns out, this was his entire savings, and he actually paid up, which I definitely had not anticipated. And, naturally, when you pay your entire savings to some random kids, you lose some stuff, and boy did this guy lose a lot of stuff. Note, I wasn't actually playing, even though I was dealing the cards, me and my friends played against each other, and not the dealer, so the dealer was only dealing and not playing, therefore I never saw a cent of that money. Didn't want to, either, friends deserved it after keeping that facade up for just long enough for him to lose what he did. The aftermath. I found out later that, when X's wife noticed he had no more money left, she left him. Apparently she was a gold digger and only married him to have money. He had no more money, so his job had to just barely pay for bills and food, which then stopped as he took up alcohol, after hitting a huge depression. His job fired him for showing up to work completely shit-faced, and he lost his house, his car, and every single belonging he had that he had under a financing agreement. He was now homeless, alone, depressed, alcoholic. When winter came, he apparently didn't fare so well against the cold, especially after getting soaked by a splash from a car driving by, and eventually froze to death on the streets. I let my friends keep the money and treat themselves with it. The one that got the guy to the table especially deserved it, since he made the entire master plan fall into place. Honestly, I believe that this was only a tale of my execution of his master plan. As I said, I would protect my family at all costs. Didn't say who had to pay those costs, did I? Also, it's 4:30 a.m. as I'm posting this. For those commenters that appear right after I post, I probably can't reply for a good bit. Sorry for that inconvenience. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.